growing up, I wanted one literally like every year for Christmas, like any event like that, I would be like, please give me a trampoline. And my dad was just like, no, you're going to kill yourself. And so anytime I had like friends in the neighborhood, and they were friends first, let me just preface this by saying that. But
You
we
weren't
would
trying to be friends with them for their trampoline.
Yes, they
Yeah,
were
okay.
friends before the trampoline.
How dare you?
Excuse me?
How dare you call yourself a musician?
Loads of bands use drum loops.
Loads of elevators play Celine Dion. That don't make it right.
Alrighty. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. This is another episode of the Scoped Exposure Podcast. We go from Calgary to Louisville, and I'm very, very excited to be welcoming on Trey of Dare on the podcast. Thanks for coming on, my friend.
What's up? Thank you for having me. I'm very excited for this.
I'm very excited as well. I've started most of these episodes just giving a little bit of context as to why I reached out to this person or any person who's coming on the show. And I think for you, I just started to see like your involvement in hardcore, just like really like just really go the distance. And you were always on like a potential guest, and I'm always like kind of waiting for that one moment where it's like, okay, now this makes sense to reach out to this person. And then seeing you join up with Dare on drums, I was like, okay, now it's time to make it happen.
Yeah,
so we're definitely going to be chatting about that, but I think there's a lot of great things to chat about on the episode today. So I appreciate you making time for me.
Oh yeah, thank you again for having me.
Absolutely. Is this your have you done other podcasts when it comes to this, or
this is my first one?
I'm your first. That means a lot to me, man. So I'll make sure you have a good experience. So we're gonna be chatting about you joining up with Dare on the drums. I know that you're also working on a project called Weapon X, which I have a lot of questions about. But before we get into the episode, as you know, Trey, we got to check some bevs. But I have to kind of confront you on something, because I saw you had a story that you said you are anti sparkling water.
Yep, 100%. I can't do it. I've tried several. I've tried like all the popular brands, and I just haven't found one that I liked at all.
So is it more of the taste or just the bubbles itself that you're just like, I can't mess with this?
It's just the taste. Everything is like too faint of a taste. And like, I'm not anti-soda, so if I want something with bubbles, I'm just gonna get soda.
Sure, okay. Because it was like I wanted to like bring it up on the podcast versus just me screenshotting that story and saying like podcast off, bro. But it is funny because for me growing up, I was not a soda or pop guy. Like I just hated the bubbles, and it only took me into my 20s where I was like, oh, I can kind of do this side of it. Yeah. So I ironically have a sparkling water, just to check off of that basis. But I am curious if you have tried this one or not. But it's tradition for the guests to go first as far as what bevs they're bringing to the show. So tell me what you're going to be bringing.
Okay. So I just got off work, so I've got a nice iced chai tea latte with a couple pumps of vanilla in there.
Do you rock your chai lattes dirty ever?
No.
Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm not the biggest like coffee drinker, and so like the actual taste of coffee, it's still like growing on me.
Sure.
Going on tour with Dare, especially because all of them drink coffee, so we'll end up getting coffee like 2-3 times a day.
Right. Yeah.
So, I know.
Angel's like a coffee connoisseur. Like he's always kind of doing that stuff. So yeah, slowly but surely. I think.
Yeah.
I think it just takes some time. Yeah. I know like most bands there's usually one member who's like a third wave coffee head, and then they're the ones being like, no, we're not going to Starbucks or Dunkin'. We're going here.
Yeah, exactly.
To check out this local spot. So surely but surely, but it's a well-deserved treat after working a long day. So for me, I'm going to be drinking a Limitless. So it's a lightly caffeinated sparkling water, the lemon lime feature. So have you had this one ever?
No, I haven't actually.
All right. Well, I'm holding you to at least trying this one, and we'll kind of see. I wouldn't say it's like the top tier best sparkling water, but it's definitely one that I fuck with. But to your credit, I do think that there are definitely some sparkling waters that are lacking flavor wise, and it's just more water.
Yeah, and I'm not opposed to trying any of them. Like I'll absolutely be trying that one, but it's just like still haven't found the one.
Yeah. I'm not expecting, there to be like on the Dare Karma tour coming up to be like a, no sparkling water in the Dare pit like t-shirt or anything like that. But Trey, cheers to you, man. Really excited to be doing this podcast with you, friend.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. I always like being people's first podcast as well. I think that means, that feels very extra special outside of you just taking time out of your day. But Trey, for any new guest who comes on the show, I always like to get a bit of context about how they got into hardcore and kind of what put you on that path. And I think, I think that there's a considerable amount of years age-wise between you and I, because I'm 29, and I don't know how old you are currently.
I'm 19.
So yeah, 10 years difference. So I think there's definitely like people that skew in that younger realm that are like getting into hardcore, but there's definitely people older. But I think that despite what generation you're a part of, I think there are certain similarities between each. So kind of tell me the origin story for you and how you got started in this whole shebang.
So with Dallas and Brian being my older brothers, I obviously I would go to shows when I was like early teens, probably closer to like 13, 14. I would go to shows and it was fun, but it like wasn't entirely my thing. And then I don't know if it was a tour or if it was just like a one-off thing, but Terror and God's Hate played Louisville in Spinelli's, which for those that don't know, it's a very small pizzeria that was downtown. And it unfortunately closed over COVID, which is a bummer, but Terror and God's Hate played Spinelli's. And seeing Terror in that small of a place with that big of a reaction got me hooked immediately. So like I've been going to shows ever since.
Yeah. For the uninitiated, if you just search "don't mosh into the pizza oven," like that's Spinelli's to a T.
Exactly.
But I think that's very interesting to me because, I think there's definitely some questions I have, with Brian's been a past podcast guest, and I think the Garris family as a whole, there's a lot to unpack there. Yeah. But I do think all it takes is you experiencing hardcore live to really seal the deal, whether you want to be about it or not. And I think, being in a really compact space and having a band that like, as big as Terror and as big as God's Hate, but like almost like different in the sense of like the types of pit it would be. Like God's Hate is more the ass beating time. I think I actually remember when Brian was on the show, he brought that show up as well. And that was your first show. And he was like, no, you're standing behind this like guitar amp or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly.
To watch from here versus like trying to be in the trenches. But yeah, like one of the very first hardcore shows for me was like, really small church basement, people going insane for this band's last show, like people like climbing up over each other to grab the mic, and then like ceiling tiles are being bounced around. And like that has just stuck with me all this time that I've been in music. So you kind of need a hardcore experience to actually get into, or to really be about hardcore, it seems.
I still have experiences like that today. Like there will be a band that I'm like not 100% hooked on, and then I'll see them live and I'm like that. I'm just hooked on them. So I think it still stands for me.
Yeah. What's been one of those more recent examples of that?
Koyo.
Okay. Yeah.
Not any diss or anything. I'm slowly getting more into like the pop punk side of things. So when they first came out, I was like, yeah, it's okay. It's not really my thing. But on the Knocked Loose Karma tour, when I was with Karma, there was a week or so where we split up and we went down through Florida. And Karma played like 2 shows back to back with like Koyo, Soulblind, Karma, Magnitude. Like they were crazy shows. So I got to see Koyo 2 nights back to back, and I was immediately hooked. That's a very special band, and I'm very happy I got the opportunity to see them live and like finally fall in love with them like everyone else did.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's like there's a bunch of things rushing to my mind. Like first, just being when Joey from Koyo came on the podcast, like he and a lot of the people in that band have that hardcore background, so like they're just kind of doing something in that more adjacent space, but still have that like spirit of a hardcore band. Like watching their FYA set, I was just like, what the fuck? Like, you know,
unbelievable.
You could like you can mute that video and put like Terror over top of it, and it would match energy wise.
Yeah, exactly. 100%.
And there's also like the fact that I think there's a lot of people, including myself, that you know, there's myself and people that listen to this podcast that got into hardcore, but like pop punk came first for them. So that also has come to mind. And you know, this is a trio part thing. I'm thinking of when Ryan from LDB said, you know, he could kind of be iffy on a band's recordings, but seeing them live kind of puts it into perspective of what they bring to a show, and then you know, he can put them on LDB Fest. So it's really, I think and especially in a time where shows were not existent and a bunch of new projects came up, and you know, cool demos were dropping. Like, you know, Pain of Truth could have totally been a band that just had a cool demo, but if they didn't like really kill it live, they wouldn't be as big as they are now.
I agree 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really wild. So, and I think, you know, there's been past podcasts during the height of the pandemic where I was really seeing like all these things. I was like, it really comes down to really killing it live to really like win over people, impress the right folks. So yeah. So with all that being said, let's kind of use that as a segue into you joining up with Dare. So, you know, friend of the show, Anaya, past drummer of the band. You know, it was kind of you know, it made sense to a degree when he was like, I'm stepping down from the band, but I was excited to see you stepping into his shoes.
Thank you.
And because it was like that longest time where I was seeing you fill in for bands on tours or just at a show, and I was like, when is Trey going to be in his home band? So tell me about that kind of like shift from your lens as far as like how that went down.
So the way it started was I was on the Knock Loose tour with Karma, and we were at Chain Reaction. I was out back selling merch, and Angel DMs me and he's like, yo, call me when you get a second. And I'm like, okay, is everything good? Because like me and Angel before, we were obviously like homies, but it wasn't like a consistent basis of talking.
Sure.
So I gave him a call, and he was like, yo, so Anaya can't do this next tour we got coming up with Life's Question. Would you be down to fill in? He was like, yeah, like we'll fly you out. Like we just need a drummer. And I was like, dude, of course. Like that was my first time ever doing like a full tour on drums. So it was like a very special thing for me. So I said yes. And then throughout that tour, I'm not going to go too deep into it, but like Anaya and the rest of the band were kind of drifting ways. So like everybody had like kind of the idea that he was going to step down. And so Angela talked to me, and he was pretty much just like, yo, like if this happens, the spot's yours if you want it. So it was pretty seamless, honestly, which I'm very thankful for. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think like, you know, I've got to chat with Anaya, and just seeing how it was like Dare and Zulu were kind of running at the same time. And like,
yeah, exactly.
Most people can't like do 2 full-time bands at the, like that's a lot of work on top of regular life things. So to kind of like just being proud of anyone that kind of realizes that like, hey, I need to shift some things in my life so I can like be the best version of myself. And to see you get you know, the opportunity to like fill in the gaps for that tour, and then it was like, hey, this is a no-brainer. So yeah, like maybe let's kind of let's pause there and kind of get a bit more context about you just like getting into drumming. And you know, like I alluded to, there was like definitely some certain sets or just like jumping on to do a song with a band that people were freaking out about. So like just talk to me about like when you actually started banging on pots, or you know, whatever it is. And then we'll kind of get back up to current affairs.
So oddly enough, I started drumming because it was either freshman or sophomore year. My So I would make pin beats on the table a lot. And
What's a pin beat?
like you take 2 pins and you just kind of make a
Oh,
beat on the table.
oh, like
Yeah.
pen. I thought you
Pin.
said pin. Okay, got you.
Yeah, pin. I would do that a lot. And my biology teacher was like, why don't you join the school band? Why don't you play drums? And I kind of took that into consideration. And then I was like slowly getting more and more into hardcore. So I was like, why don't I just play this type of music instead of joining the school band? And so like I started drumming in 2017. I got my drum set that year for Christmas. And from then on, I've just been like 100% self-taught. And yeah, the first time I played was with Karma at Spinelli's. And it was a little after a year of me drumming, which was crazy. But I had like posted a cover of one of their songs. And then when they were coming through, they were like, yo, you should play this with us. Cause
that's super sick.
yeah, it was awesome. Cause they were already like really good friends of mine. I've played Fortnite with Jordan and Edgar from that band for probably close to 5 years now. So
Oh, really?
yeah, we've been playing that almost every day for years now. So they're like my best friends in the whole world.
So I think it's very serendipitous that your biology teacher is like,
Yeah.
hey, you should do a band or music or join the school band versus
Yeah.
like, hey, can you stop banging and like focus
Yeah.
on learning about anatomy or all that kind of bullshit. So I think that's, you know, whether there was like maybe some underlying like, hey, I just want you to get this clearly is something that you're a part of and I want you to get that out of your system so you
Yeah.
can focus on science. But I think that is like that's like, you know, that's just like a seed that's just planted. And then, you know, like over time it's like, yeah, maybe I should do that. And then, yeah, like joining the school band and then like teaching yourself. And all it took was like putting yourself out there with like the cover and then befriending the band. And then it sounded like they proposed that idea to you versus you trying to like come at them like, hey, can I like, because, you know, if it's the first time, you know, I feel like whenever, you know, even because hardcore is very known for like grab like someone passing the mic to do that, and a lot of time it's like strangers, you know, like Scott Vogel from Terror is like handing the mic off to probably like 20 people per set versus like 1 or 2 people, and like most of those people are just like, Scott isn't like, this is my homie who's also in this band. It's just like, here's this random girl who's screaming, like, you do this part.
Yeah.
So like, what was that like initial, like, was that a lot of pressure for you on that initial time of like, holy shit, you trust me to like drum one of your songs on your tour?
Yeah. I remember it making me incredibly anxious, and leading up to it, I was anxious. And then at the show, I actually got a black eye, like a song or 2 before I played with them.
Oh,
I got popped really hard. And so that just added on top of my anxiety right before I had to play.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, will I be able to see? Or is it all like, do I have to rely on the muscle memory just that much more?
Yeah, it was rough.
Yeah.
I was like pretty much crying out of one eye the entire time.
Yeah. Tears of joy and
Exactly.
pain only coming out of the one eye.
Exactly.
Yeah, a good concoction there. But I think like, especially for someone at your age, I think that is like a very crucial and pivotal thing to like really, like I think of, you know, this is a little bit of a different scenario, but like I remember when Jesus Beast did that whole thing with Cody the Supergirl, I think that's her name, and it was like at This Is Hardcore, like how crazy is that going to be for her as she's growing up and like starts her first hardcore band, you know, 10 years from now or 5 years or 3 years, whatever it is. But I do think that like like bigger bands, or not even bigger bands, because Karma is like, they're a great band, but they're like, it's totally different levels. But I did think any band to kind of see that young spark or that young fire to be able to just like roll the dice and do that, I think that's like very, very cool and commendable of anyone who does that.
Yeah.
Like how did that first Karma like drum fill-in or whatever, like how do you think that helped like shape you and like form your mindset on everything?
A lot. like it helped way more than I realized now that I think about it, because like without that practice, I played a couple times after that. Like I played with Karma again. I played with Life's Question, Knocked Loose, just like random little sit-ins. But like without that first practice, it would have been way harder to do the rest of them. And now I've got practice through like touring and stuff, but I get very nervous still. It definitely helped more than I realized.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can say as someone who's 10 years older than you, that nervousness before a set starts, like that never goes away.
Yeah.
But if
So
anything,
I've heard.
yeah. But if anything, that shows that you give a shit. That you're like, hey, this set like matters to me. Whether there's like 1,000 people in the room or 10 people in the room, like there is always that element of like, you know, it puts you on that extra edge of like really trying to do your best. I think if you lose that level of nervousness, like something's off.
Yeah.
So, you know, fast forwarding a little bit. So you do a couple things, you're getting a little bit of notice, you're kind of like making these connections, and then you join Dare, and it's kind of like getting to see you kind of jump into the deep end versus like having that like, here's like, you know, we're doing this like little run, it's only a weekend, it's like now, you know, Dare's like a full-time band half the time.
Exactly.
So like how has that been even just on a logistical side, because that band's like OC, California, Orange County, all that good stuff, and you're like all the way on the other side of the country. So how has that been logistically figuring out things for you?
They've helped me with like all my flights and stuff. So like the getting back and forth has been relatively easy. Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's been like fairly easy, honestly. Like if we've got something coming up, they'll just be like, yo, could you look into flights for this? And then I'm really bad at looking for flights. So I'll send one and then they'll send me a better one back. And I'm like, okay, works for me.
Right. And is that like, is it just because you're like, oh, like, is this a better route, or should I go with this airline, or like, should I look on this day? And they're like, yeah, like you have to do this. Yeah.
I still just don't know what to look for. So most of the time, Gabe is managing us now. So I'm just like, hey, Gabe, you want to help me out?
Yeah. Yeah.
Gabe's
that's funny.
the best.
Yeah. Shout out to Gabe. That's someone that I recently saw that he's doing the band managing stuff, and that's really, really cool to see his evolution as well. So shout out to him. Very early podcast guest as well. And I've been meaning to do to do a part 2, because I think the first time that we chatted, I was still getting in the mix of interviewing people and those kind of things. So, so yeah, it sounds like even though you're kind of jumping into this bigger band, you're still like quote unquote green to a degree. You have a lot of people in your core to be able to help guide you and educate you on like, not even just like how to play in a band, but just how to do different band things. So, you know, definitely a curiosity of mine was, you know, with Dallas and Brian, 2 older brothers of yours who are also doing band stuff. Like how pivotal in your perspective was it to have an older brother, or even 2 older brothers who are like super active in this stuff? Because I haven't seen really any other like family dynamic, like, you know, maybe there's like a twin or like a brother, or maybe it's like a couple who are in a band together and doing that. But like how instrumental, you know, there's the instrumental side of someone like Karma or like other bands like that giving you the chance, but like what was like the seed that was planted, seeing, you know, your Brian especially at his essentially at your age going out and doing the Knock Loose thing even before the Pure Noise acquisition? Just talk to me about that.
Trying to think of how to word this. Obviously when I was like, I've been trying to be in bands for years, but like I would just like hit people up, it'd fall through, hit people up, it'd fall through. And so like watching Brian do it just made me want to do it more. Me and Dallas are kind of like slowly getting into touring together, because he had done a tour a couple years back, like before with Knock Loose, before they had like really blown up. Right. But now he's touring with Terror as their merch guy. So it's like we're both kind of jumping into it. But like even just being on that Karma Knocked Loose tour, watching everybody around me do it just made me want to do it more. So
Mm.
like having the opportunity to do that with Dare is just like a blessing to me, because it kind of just fell into my lap, honestly. And
Right.
I'm like so thankful for it.
Yeah. But like, to your credit though, I think that there are, you put yourself out there to a degree, putting a drum cam. Like, I think some people even won't do something as small as that because they're like, oh, what if someone thinks my drumming is off, or they'll kind of like whatever. But like, even just something as simple as that caught the eye of so and so, and then that like it was just a domino effect. And I think like I'm just hitting on this so hard because I think a lot of people, especially in the social media digital age that we are, they get so hyper focused on the amount of likes or views of something has. But I'm like, even if a video has like 10 views, one of those views could be the member of that band, and then they're like hitting you up to do that. So I think like, if you're really wanting to put it out, like, don't get tripped up off of like comparing yourself off of streams or listens. Like, I think it's all about just showing up at the end of the day.
Exactly.
So I think it's also kind of a funny thing too, because going back to the family dynamics, like Dallas was featured on Knocked Loose's first record, and then there's like plenty of times where like in live settings you've been out on tour with Knocked Loose and done a guest spot here and there. Even like the duo, I think at LDB 2020. So I think it's interesting how like, maybe there's one member of a family who is like the touring person, and then everyone else maybe has a normie job or whatever. But it seems like all like it's the entire brotherhood of the Garris brothers doing that. So I'm curious if like your mom or your dad has said anything or just had any revelations of like, oh, I thought it was just gonna be Brian, but now all my kids are doing this crazy hardcore thing.
More recently, they've definitely thought that. They knew that I'm a drummer, obviously. And I had started this band with Isaac. It's been like a year in the making now, probably more, because the singer had the idea for it like probably before I was into hardcore. But it just kind of like wasn't going anywhere. I was still just like kind of doing my own thing, just drumming at home. And then, like I said, the Dare thing, I'm not going to say fell into my lap again, but it just happened so quick. And the same thing with like Dallas going on tour with Terror. So now they're definitely like, they just got their hands full.
Yeah. And like, I think a lot of things within the music industry just happen at a very rapid pace because, especially for the Dare situation, it was like, hey, we need to figure out a drummer thing for this upcoming thing. We're not going to like there, it's too much work to try and like shift an entire thing and give us more buffer. And why not like reach out to this person that we know is capable of it and giving him a shot? I'm just thinking of it from your parents' lens of like, hey, I got this offer to join this band in California, like, see ya.
Yeah.
But I think that's really dope. Like, and that happens again when you show up, when you put shit out, the right people will see it, and then they'll, hey, Spencer, can you come out and film this show for me in a week's time? A good friend of mine, I'm just gonna shout out my friend Alan. He's kind of like a version. He's very similar to me, where he was like creating content for bands, maybe not on like an archivist side, but like, doing little snippets and photos.
Yeah.
And then just over a matter of time, like just doing that for local bands. And then a matter of time, the manager of one band he did it for also manages Beartooth. And then he's hanging out with Caleb Show in LA. So
that's
I think
crazy.
It's just, yeah. And it's like, dude, and it was like a week's notice of like, hey, can you come down and do this? So again, I think just really hitting on showing up and reminding people that it's just like one moment away from everything changing for you.
Exactly.
So
couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And I think that's hard to wrap your head around when you're an adult and you don't understand the crazy music industry or even just hardcore in general. So you're like, wait, is there like some form you need to sign because you're getting hired? It's like, no, these are just my friends and they need a drummer and we're going out and doing this thing.
Yep.
based off of that, I think when a new guitar player, bass player, drummer is like coming into something that is like quote unquote established, there's a balance of like learning that stuff and honoring, that's how that fill was written, but also wanting to like throw your own spin on it. So how has that process been with you when joining up with Dare?
So I got home from the tour, the Knock Loose tour, and I had 8 days to learn the like probably like 15 song or so set before I flew back out.
That's like 2 songs per day.
Yeah, exactly. So most of it I kind of learned how it was written. But now I've done 2 tours with them, and then we just played a fest out in Tacoma, Washington. And over time I've definitely kind of developed my own style and kind of changed up the own fills a little. I don't know why. I've kind of changed them up a little bit. I'm all for that, honestly. As long as it's not anything like too drastic, then because to a certain degree, I think you do have to respect like how it was written and recorded.
Right.
But
it's one thing to be like, I'm just gonna make this halftime like a 2-step, and it's like we actually can't do that. That's gonna mess the whole vibe of the song. But if it's just like having like a hit versus just on the snare and floor tom, adding like a kick in between that, like if you feel like that's better, I think that's. But yeah, it's just interesting because you came into the mix right after like Dare put out this new record.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm sure you're like very eager to like when you guys are gonna do a next release, like wanting to make your stamp on it with your own beats and all that.
Very excited for that.
Yeah, but it is a process of like, this is how people hear it. I don't want to mess up the flow. I just, I think it's like subtly changing things. I think for my Works podcast, we had an artist on, and he was saying, instead of trying to drastically change your style, and especially if it's known for a certain way, just like slowly, making changes so that over 2 or 5 years time, it's drastically different, but you kind of like handheld the fan base through all that, if you know what I mean.
Ease into it.
Absolutely. So what is your drumming, practice like setup? Like, are you very diligent of like, I got to practice like once a day? It needs to be like off, like I got to have a certain bev with me. Like, I'm just kind of curious on like, how you get ready for things and how you just like keep the creative juices flowing.
So my practices are like, I don't get to as much as I would like to, just because I do live with both my parents. My dad gets home from work, the last thing he wants to hear is my drum set downstairs. So like, say he takes a quick shower, I run down to my drum room. On Thursdays and Saturdays, both my parents play cards, so I've got like the whole night to just be down there by myself, either like covering stuff, just kind of like jamming around, just doing whatever. But like, I do it as much as I can when I can.
Yeah. I feel like there's some constraints already set because you live at home still.
Yeah.
But then it's like, okay, these are the times that I'm going to do it. Versus like if you had your drum set at a studio or whatever, and then you can kind of go. But I think having a rhythm of like when you're doing it, I like the idea of like, oh, dad's going in the shower, just running down and like practicing some blast beats or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
Have you nailed down the time of like what a normal shower is for him? You're like, okay, I can at least play these 2 songs.
Yeah. It's anywhere in between probably 10 and 15 minutes. And I just run down there with my AirPods. Most of the time during the showers, I'll go down there and just like play some songs that I've been listening to recently.
Right.
But on like Thursdays and Saturdays, I just go down there, take deep breaths, do whatever I want.
Right.
It's nice.
Yeah. I'm sure there's been times where, you're like, okay, 10, 15 minutes is up, and then you come back and he's like still in the shower, and you're like, oh, you're like really, you're taking a really long shower.
Yeah, exactly. And most of the time, I don't even try and time it. I just go until he texts me to stop.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So there's a bit of a window of like, okay, now it's over. Yeah, that's really funny. I remember when we were jamming and practicing for a show, we had a hard out time because I think it was like after 9 p.m. we like the tenants below where we were jamming are like, okay, like no more noise after that time. So we're like trying to get like practice done, and like we're in the last breakdown, and I'm looking and it's like 8:59. I'm like, oh, are we gonna have to cut this break, like the song short? But it was like the minute we stopped, the hour changed over.
So sick.
So yeah, it was like but yeah, I think it is it's important to have some kind of schedule, even if you have some constraints as well. You're an avid front flipper.
Yeah.
So
I'm a fan.
I'm a fan. So how much of that is youth as far as like the craziness and the, getting the height, and how much of it is like, oh, I know to jump over these people that are standing? Because I've seen you do it in a ton of videos, and I'm like, the height is definitely there. So how much of that is youth and you just being a young spry whippersnapper, and how much of that is like, oh, like I know how to get my body at that height and flipping in that motion?
The energy I will attribute to me being young. The rest of it, I like growing up, I always loved like trampolines and stuff. So I was always learning flips and stuff like that. And then it got to a point where over like early quarantine, I was learning how to do backflips on flat ground.
Okay.
And so like a lot of it is just me being able to really jump high. So that's like the main part of it. And I just know not to land on my head.
Yeah. At least when you're jumping on people, there's a little bit of a cushion there versus like if you're just doing it on flat ground. So you're in the backflip game as well.
I'm afraid to now. I'm sure if I went in my backyard right now, I could probably do one if I just committed to it. But as of right now, I'm not sure.
Yeah. I feel like when you're doing it at a show, it's like I've seen people do the backflips just like in a flat ground setting. Like you're just doing it singular versus you're trying to do a backflip onto people. Like versus trying to like kind of do that motion in that way. But yeah, I think it's so did you have a trampoline growing up, or did you like not have access to that?
No, because my dad was always anti-trampoline.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Growing up, I wanted one literally like every year for Christmas, like any event like that, I would be like, please give me a trampoline. And my dad was just like, no, you're going to kill yourself. And so anytime I had like friends in the neighborhood, and they were friends first, let me just preface this by saying that.
You weren't trying to be friends with them for their trampoline.
Yes, they were friends before the trampoline. But I was always over at like other people's houses using it rather than my own.
Yeah. Yeah, it is funny. I think when if your family is fortunate enough to get a trampoline or a pool, I think it just when you're in school, the word gets out, and then people are like, yo, can we come over and
exactly.
Yo,
rock Trey's got a trampoline.
Exactly. Yeah, no. So it's safe to say that, when you grow up and maybe you're buying your first house, the first thing that you're getting is a trampoline.
Oh, it's going in ground immediately.
It's in ground.
I'm going to have the biggest like rectangle trampoline right in the backyard. It's going to be perfect.
It is crazy to see the invisible springboards at like some festivals where some people just have like the most insane vertical. So there almost needs to be a survey of like, if like for all the flippers, like how much of you grew up with the trampoline and how much of you didn't.
Yeah.
You could have totally lied and be like, oh yeah, like my dad sells trampolines and we have 6 in the backyard, and I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. But it's like, no, I've learned how to do solid flips even without the trampoline upbringing.
I won't lie. Now we do have one because a kid that I was friends with like moved out of his house and they didn't take it. So we literally like me, Brian, and Dallas went over there, lifted the trampoline above the fence and just walked it to our house.
Did your dad know, or you're just like,
Oh,
no,
yeah.
we're just okay? You're like, no,
It
we're
just got
just
to
gonna
a
grab
point.
this. We're
It
just
got
gonna
to a
grab this
point where he
trampoline.
was like, okay, I'm not going to be able to stop you all. So
Sure, yeah. But at least there was like a buffer time where he's like, well, at least I tried, but life finds a way, and
yeah, exactly.
trampolines find a way. Yeah,
Can't pass up on a free one either. So
yeah, I think it is. Whether you have a trampoline or you're into that, like going to those like parkour gyms where it has like the trampolines on the walls and all that stuff, like that shit never gets old. I will say that. So let's kind of transition. So another project that you're in the midst of right now that you alluded to at the beginning is Weapon X. And I think there's been a lot of like, oh, Weapon X is coming, but there hasn't been actually anything in the midst of that. So can you just for the fans or anyone who's like, I don't know what that is, like just break down what that project is and what people can expect as that I'm sure is starting to roll out in the next little while.
Yeah. So Weapon X is our friend Dave from here in Louisville, and then me, Brian, and Isaac. Brian's on bass, Isaac guitar. For years, Dave has had like a thing where he's like, okay, I'm going to start this straight edge band. It's going to be called Weapon X, because he's like a big comic guy, obviously. And then it got to a point where I hit up Isaac and I was like, yo, let's start this. Like, what are we waiting on? Let me be a part of this. First of all, I kind of invited myself in on it. And then slowly but surely over quarantine, me and Isaac would get together and we would jam and kind of write certain things. So everything's written, everything's recorded except vocals, and it should be coming out very soon.
Very cool. Yeah.
Very soon.
And your guys' first show is LDB 2022.
Yeah. March, I want to say it's the 11th.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're like, I should know this, but
It's something like that.
Something like that. So just so I understand correctly, so the idea of the band was first just the name. Like, I want to start a project called this.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Then it was like, okay, let's fill in the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
That's very cool. That's like very reminiscent of like when Joseph from Tsunami was on the band, he was always talking about how Theo was like, I want to start a band called Tsunami that's spelt incorrectly.
So sick.
And then it's like other people like gravitating to that idea. And it could just be the coolness of a name, or, obviously there's the straight edge element to it as well.
Yeah.
But I like that idea of just having a dope name and then just kind of like plugging in things to actually make it happen versus like, and there's no one way to do a band. Like some people like write a demo and then they come up with the name, which totally works. But I like almost like the reverse engineering of things to that way. When it comes to that, like it is, and you don't have to say if you can even say or not. Will recordings be out before or after LDB?
Before.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Which is like really coming down the pipe, it seems.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah. So maybe you and I can talk afterwards as far as like when is best to drop your episode around that day, because that would definitely be a good thing. What are you most excited about, like how that band is, musically compared to what you're doing with Dare? Like what's the different strokes that you're trying to scratch?
Dare is a lot more like groovy, and it's I was gonna say like probably a little bit more technical than Weapon X stuff, but now that I think about it, Weapon X does have a couple songs where I kind of tried to pop off while writing them, but it's mainly just way heavier, so that I'm very excited to play like heavier music for the first time.
Yeah I think being able to be like, this is the band, especially if you're a drummer, like, and there are a lot of similarities in the different styles of beats, but it's like if a certain band, you're like, oh, this is where I can kind of do more technical like handwork, but then you have your other band that's like, this is just all footwork and breakdowns and double bass and all that shit. So yeah, I'm very excited. I love that it hasn't been like this like it's more just been a lot of word of mouth that I've seen
Yeah.
about this band versus like, here's the little teaser that we're gonna post and try to be mysterious.
Yeah.
So I
I was
think
honestly, go ahead.
no, you go.
I was honestly like blown away by the like reaction to us just being announced on LDB, because like throughout the day I would like look up Weapon X on Twitter to see if people were tweeting about it, and there was like 5 to 10 tweets, which is like a lot for a band that doesn't have any music out.
Or
And I was just
like social
genuinely
media
blown
or
away.
any of that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So like I'm stoked just because people are stoked for it.
Which is really cool, because I think a thing that people forget in hardcore 2022 environment is that people will buy, like, it's the market of like the hardcore community that will buy into an idea of a band. It doesn't matter if you have the strongest social media team behind you or the craziest stuff. It's like putting stuff out and allowing people to decide whether it's sick or not is the thing really in life. Like, there's a lot of businesses that will like spend millions of dollars like orchestrating this product and all that, and then once they put it out, it's like it sucks ass, and then then the company goes under. So, and maybe this is just like a quick like plug for Liquid Death. It's like they put that product out without they put the idea of the product out without actually having any like, they didn't like make millions of cans and then announce the company. They literally like made it as a joke to test like, hey, would people be into this idea?
Yeah.
And people clearly were, and then they started the company. So I think it's really cool to be able to like even just like putting a couple $100 into like a demo and just putting it out, and then if it like really catches, you're like, oh shit, I think this is a huge band that I'm going to be a part of now. What has been what are you what's the thing that you're most excited to do with Weapon X live that you haven't been able to do yet?
I'm very excited to play with Brian. Obviously the band has a sweet spot for me because my older brother's in it.
Right.
That's probably the biggest one.
Has that been something that like you and Brian or even Dallas have like joked about growing up? It's like, oh yeah, when are we going to be in a band together and all that? But now it's like this is the first time that's actually happened.
Yeah. We've talked about it a lot. Brian moved to LA over the pandemic. So now the thought of 3 of us doing a band is kind of like out of reach, unfortunately.
Sure.
But whenever he comes home, I'm sure we're going to make it happen. We have to.
Yeah. No, I think that's really cool. And it's cool to see the different generations and just like, I think when I saw you and Dallas all doing the guest spot to Dead Ringer, which is like, there's so many layers to that. There's like the fact that all you guys are doing that, and then correct me if I'm wrong, like Dead Ringer is about like Brian, like your dad, so there's like that element to it as well. Is that right?
That I'm not entirely sure.
Okay,
if I'm being quite honest.
Yeah, I think maybe it's not your dad. Maybe it's just like some family member who has that like musical background as well. Someone can fact check that later on. But I think it is really cool to be able to like have that camaraderie and being able to do that band, even if it's like we might play a fest once a year or kind of doing this thing. I know Isaac, who's been on the show before, has always been like, when one of his many side projects has traction, he's like, oh, I hate that this isn't full time. So I want to kind of shift gears to one of the last things that we can talk about, Trey. So like, you're a young dude in this hardcore space, and you're clearly getting a lot of like really cool things coming your way. I think it's really important to kind of like have a check of like, because I think a lot of people can get into this space and maybe they get not like wrapped up in the wrong crowd isn't the right thing, but like maybe they are looking to someone that maybe has not like the right mindset when it comes to hardcore and how you should carry yourself. And obviously like you have the people within your Louisville circle, but they also have your brothers and all that kind of stuff. So what do you think is like the guiding mindset that someone should have if they want to be involved in hardcore and, do cool things, but also just be a good person at the end of the day?
You're not better than anyone else that's involved, period. We're all in this for the same reason. We like the music. We enjoy like live music, and that's all there is to it. Like, there's no reason to put people down or act like you're cooler than anyone, because you're not. You're just a loser that likes hardcore like I am. And that's the only thing I can say for that.
Yeah, I think the reminder of like, I think a lot of people would just be like, oh, it's so cool to like this weird music. It's like, it is very weird. It's very strange.
Yeah.
To your goals of the year is like spending hundreds of dollars to fly to like a random part of the world just to go to a festival versus like these other things. So I think taking a step back and being like, yeah, we all are losers, and we all have like this weird obsession with this music, but I think that's what unifies us. And to use that as the guiding like way versus trying to be like, oh, like, what, I'm not going to talk to this person, or I'm going to be kind of whatever. And I think, I think as an extra point there, I think Louisville has a lot of people within the scene who have kind of sussed out some of that bullshit and have a little bit like more of a stronger unified community, and like off of the fact of just needing that when you're more of like an underdog scene. Yeah. You're like in the Midwest, not as privileged as something like California or New York or some of those things. Like, were there any moments with anyone like outside of your family, let's say, that like really helped put you on that right path versus trying to like make you feel like you needed to act a certain way to be accepted?
Everyone knocked loose, really. Excluding Brian, because like he is my older brother, obviously, but like everyone in Knocked Loose has done nothing but show me like what hard work does for yourself, because that is easily like the hardest working band out right now. They're going 24/7, just like everything they can do nonstop. So just like watching them grow as a band and as people has been awesome. And it's just like really helped me keep the right outlook on everything.
Totally. Yeah. And I think a lot of people, it was funny when Isaac was on the podcast. He was talking about like being in a band like Knock Loose that worked their faces off, and I don't think that anyone can deny that to get to the level that they are, and they continue to work their faces off. And then there's like a band like Inclination that puts out like an EP here and an EP there, and then it like explodes. So I try my best as many times as I can to just remind people that like, even if you have a hardcore demo that pops, like no one owes you shit. And but if you put in the work, like people will notice. Like people that I never expected to give a shit about my podcast have noticed, because I've like put out almost 200 of these, And so it really like boils down to being nice and being just like a good person and putting in the work, so that people are like, I want to hang out with Trey. I want to hang out with Spencer. I want to hang out with this person.
Exactly.
And like, and meld my worlds with what they're doing.
It's just like what you said earlier, just showing up.
Yeah. Showing up, and also just being like, just genuine, because I think it's, I think a lot of people can have quick jumps up to like, going after people or trying to like manipulate things, but like those people don't have longevity in this scene, in my opinion. I think like
100%.
I think bands like Knocked Loose, I think bands like Terror, like the people that have been around and have like genuine people that like give a shit about their friend group and everyone else, not just their collection of bands, like really help seal the deal when they're starting a band like in their 30s and 40s. And then like, even if they're starting a business, like people will go and support them because of what they did in their hardcore scene. So I think it really matters. And I clearly see that you're on the correct path when it comes to like how to just carry yourself. Cause I think a lot of people can get lost in the sauce when they're trying to just do the cool hardcore thing and try to be on all the cool festivals.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trey, this has been a great chat, bro. And I really appreciate you coming on the pod. Before we start to wrap up, is there any final words that you want to say? Anything like that?
Dare and Karma have a tour coming up soon, right after LDB. It's like a Midwest East Coast tour. Flyers are all over Instagram and Twitter and stuff. So come check out a show, say what's up. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Weapon X music coming soon.
Yes, very excited about that. The last portion of the podcast, Trey, as you know, is we have to end on a Mosh story, and that could be anything that's first to your mind. That could be something funny, something really wholesome, something really violent and crazy and scary. Whatever's first to your head.
I had a couple of these coming to mind. The first one is a couple of years back. There was a weekend in Louisville where like Judiciary played, and the next day it was like Purgatory and like a bunch of like kind of like Midwest bands. But Drain ended up hopping on the day with Judiciary, and it was like a surprise kind of thing. And there's a video that went around of me, Brian, and Dallas, all three moshing to Drain at the same time, which was very wholesome.
Right.
Yeah. Another one is, like I said earlier, I got a black eye right before I played with Karma. Shout out Jimmy Dunbar for that, because he's terrifying. But yeah, another thing that was just like going around Twitter and stuff was the giant front flip I did in San Antonio off stage. It's probably my biggest one yet. Yeah.
Has any front flip experiences gone awry for you? Like not according to plan?
Yes, actually. So when A Different Shade of Blue came out, there was the release weekend in Louisville. And so the big headlining show, people were not catching you. So all night, like to Mind Force, Knocked Loose, anytime I dove, I was quite literally front flipping off stage to my feet and landing every single time, because people would just scatter as soon as they saw you coming.
Yeah. Like, I can't believe I have to say this on the podcast, but if someone is flipping or diving, like, you have to catch them. There's like this unsaid rule. Like I've seen that all the time where someone's doing something and you see the sidestep. Like, you're in that area for a reason. So like you gotta. There's a notion that if someone is standing there, they know that that's like the splash zone, if you will, of like people diving or jumping off. So if you're not instead of stepping to the side, just step all the way to the back or
protect
or
your neck.
Somewhere else. Protect your neck. That's
Grow
right.
up.
Yeah, it is funny though, because I've told this story in the podcast multiple times. So the very first time I stage dove was like, I think it was I don't think I've ever said the band, but I think I was seeing Greeley Estates in Winnipeg, and I got on stage and I jumped off, and it was like picture perfect. It was like, catch, the surfing for a little bit and then kind of plop back on stage. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to the other side of the stage and do this. And then it was like, I just took out my friend that I went to the show with. So it was like karma in that way of the balancing of the scales.
On the Knocked Loose tour, there was a couple times where I would just be going too crazy to knock loose. And I remember one time I dove and then I was getting pushed back on stage, kind of like a backflip. And I rolled directly into Isaac's mic stand as he was trying to sing something. So he had to like move out of the way real quick.
That nothing is worse than taking a microphone to the teeth. So it was like, quick thinking on Isaac's part for sure. Yeah. It's wild, like seeing some of the people will do that. And I've always maybe not overthought, but just like been like, oh my gosh, are you okay? But like some people are just like so in the moment that they'll just like roll. Mike Stan goes, they roll over the pedals for the guitar player, and then they'll just like jump off. And it's like you can't, unless it's like okay, this person clearly is just not self-aware of like, where they're being, or,
Mhm.
the person that pushed them, like it was more on them. But it's just like the beautiful chaos that is a live show and how many
Yeah.
things can go wrong, yet people will still play is super cool. So Trey, thank you again for coming on the
Thank you
podcast.
so much for having me. This was a blast.
The Dare Karma dates and all your socials be in the description and the show notes. And I
Thank
can't
you.
wait for us to finally meet up in person. I feel like it's been a long, long time, but
Yeah.
I feel like this is the year that it will happen.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. That's right.